I'm Brendan, and welcome to Personality Epistemology. In this video, I want to briefly talk through the layout that I have on screen here. This is actually, as my process with this goes, several things. Like I made this, the main part of this in a presentation software, and then I put it into OBS, the recording software I'm using, and then I added these other elements on the screen, pulling them off of other instances of these layout things in here. So I titled this Boundary, Turbulence, and Paradigm Change in Education, Professions, and Politics. And so I came to this is sort of the intuitive and thinking and reflecting and anticipation sort of integrated result of stuff I was thinking about yesterday. So building on what I've been doing. So I have, where to begin? Okay, so basically, like, I saw this video yesterday on YouTube called, it was on this topic of like people not having friends, like an epidemic of friendlessness, and they were not having close friends. And then from there, I saw, like, I just happened to come across that, but then I saw this other video and recommendations on boundaries, and so I watched that, and boundaries are a thing that I'm in the process of trying to sort through with various people, where previously it was possible to have more flowing interactive conversation, and then it's more recently with a number of people it's become where even saying any words it requires consent. And it's like the reasons for this, this whole concept of boundaries, there's different forms of this, of course, like with one's body, or like one's house. You don't want people in your house who aren't supposed to be there. But it's like with talking, with people who one has shared interests with, and a history of talking, or communication of some sort. It's like this shifting around of boundary of rule. It's the rule, like shifting rules. Like it's like, some of this, of course, is contextual. Like if someone's having a bad day or is sick, they has a migraine, they may not be in the same openness to talk, right? And also trauma and so on, like if people are overwhelmed with trauma and so on, or a range of things, like words could become, any words could become painful or add to the problem, and if you just want to be left alone, likewise. So I understand moment to moment, or at different points people shift, and I think people understand this generally, right? But there's something about, like, this boundaries video, it's like it described someone deciding to use boundaries more sort of deliberately, and then this involved basically cutting off a bunch of people from talking, or from the sort of communication flow that existed before. And so I found this interesting and informative, because it reminded me of sort of what sometimes happens kind of abruptly. It's like a sort of openness to some kind of interaction, and then suddenly the rules change. And then I know for me, a lot of times, because I'm embroiled, you could say, in like researching and connecting all this content together, like I tend to stream out like different things I find and so on. And at a lot of times that's been welcome to people, like, but then it kind of becomes. I mean, part of it's diminishing returns. Like, people kind of get the sense of like the range of stuff I'm sharing or whatever, and then it's just too much content, or the value in engaging with it is less. Both and I think what's happening, I think widely, is people are becoming overwhelmed with content, and in 2011 I had this sort of series of experience where I came up with this term infoenergic overload or overwhelm, because I was in like researching and connecting and all this stuff, and it kind of just, it adds up to like you could say a boiling point, or it's just too much. And I mean, I've just been able to kind of process and work through that. I mean, I guess earlier in my life, when I was 22, this maybe similar thing kind of messed me up more, but like in 2011, I mean, I'm referring to a decade before, but in 2011, it's like 2 decades ago, 1 decade ago. 1 decade ago, I was able to use music to process through all of this, and layouts and drawing pretty well. Like The Roots featuring John Legend, The Fire, and some of these sort of fire themed songs, and World on Fire, and also pressure songs like Billy Joel Pressure, and Queen and David Bowie, Under Pressure, and so on. And now, more recently, there's the song Surface Pressure from Encanto. So many more songs I'd like to share, but I could do that in another video. So, okay, so all of that said, this layout, I guess I could talk through it. What it came to mind to me to do is actually play songs and videos and sort of it's like reaction or talk through, but it seems like it would be worth like mentioning the items on this layout. So I mean, I was gonna play this introduction to participant observation video, but I'll pull that off the screen for a minute. So what we have here is, I mean, I have a reference to Ray Dalio's principles for success: embrace reality and deal with it. And I conceptualize reality as including human history and intergenerational context and global context and the future, even though it hasn't been, I mean, depending on your views of how history and lives play out, some people think it's all predetermined, some people think people can make their own choices, but obviously, I mean, I think that people can make, at least at times, I mean, many times people are going through motions, or their range of choosing is kind of narrow, or just putting into practice principles or scripts or routines, or reacting, responding to what happens. But it's possible to develop a sort of higher order anticipation and reflection process when one has like a bigger map of one's context, like history or so on. So and as an INTJ personality type, with introverted intuition and extroverted thinking in particular, I mean, going beyond the type paradigm, even, like, I have very significantly developed introverted intuition in this whole world of content. But then some people visualize things in their minds or hear things, and I do not have any, like, I don't hear things, I don't see things in my mind very well. Like, it's kind of rare that I have even sort of a vague glimmer of seeing in my mind, even with memories and stuff. It's more intuitive it's hard to explain, but this is why pouring things out onto paper and layouts and talking through is so needed, and for me, and then this allows me to work with the inner world, and I can connect things together inside, like when my mind is active, like lyrics come to mind, or memories, or reflections, or articles, or whatever, and then I can sort of think through a series of, or infer or intuit through a series of, like, this comes to mind, this comes to mind, this comes to mind, and but I can do it a lot more rapidly on a layout with like 100 items. So, and then extroverted thinking as my sort of secondary function, or my primary extroverted function. This is how and why, I guess, many times when I'm interacting with people, I'm more, and engaging with the world, I'm more using extroverted thinking, which includes things like thinking, or wondering, asking, does it work, and stuff like that. And if things are not working, or not working well, then I am motivated to figure out how to change them, including with myself. Like, I struggle with cleaning, and then why, I mean, this overlaps with the ADHD concept, or interpretation thing, diagnosis, whatever. And I could get into that more, like how, but part of what I'm doing with personality epistemology, part of the whole concept is to formulate how to do diagnosis and interpretation of people, or AKA folk diagnosis, or it's not even, I mean, that kind of implies like a shared group interpretation, but it's like these days people can, some people are also figuring out their own unique, and people are having to figure out their own unique way to make sense of themselves and each other, and often it's like I've found, like trying to figure out my identity when I was younger, like in a word sense, like what labels or concepts are applicable for understanding myself, and also communicating with others about myself. And I mean, I don't even mean so much my personal identity, but kind of my differences, or my, what's going on with me, or what kind of person am I, or what, these types of things. And I really struggled. So, and that's a whole story. But the ADHD diagnosis, even though I take psych diagnoses with a grain of salt, to say the least, the ADHD diagnosis, inattentive subtype, that's the only diagnostic structure that it's just like, yeah, I have like all the symptoms all the time. So there's something to it. I mean, so that's something to unpack. And I also somewhat recently found a how to ADHD channel, and I find that extremely helpful. So, and then it overlaps though with all these other things. So, I mean, this gets into how a lot of things with people are kind of universal, but then how they manifest, or how people experience and deal with them, vary between people and cultures. So, and then there's, I mean, with this information overload thing, this is maybe perhaps unprecedented, although it kind of overlaps with, no, 1 second. It kind of overlaps with, it's like liminal periods of shared experience, or human history, or whatever, or the history of groups or locations of people, in these sort of shifting liminal times between eras. I think people in many contexts in history have had this thing of like, it's like the breakdown of currently known things, or you need new meanings or something like that to make sense of things. So, and then this can also happen on a personal level, and which is relevant to self-transformation, and it's also relevant to, or it's what's happening often when people have different kinds of breakdowns and meltdowns and struggles. Many instances of what's called psychosis are kind of a sort of liminality. So, and it's like the open dialogue approach with psychosis has found that if people can just talk through things with people they know and some support, even if they're just pouring out nonsense or what appears to be nonsense to other people, or it actually evolves generally if there's the right supports and stuff in place. It kind of goes from confusing or seemingly nonsensical into more understandable things, and I found that too, including just with free writing. Like, my mind is not working, no mental energy, I'm stuck, and then pouring out words onto paper or sketching things, or thinking of like, okay, I'm gonna go do a life timeline and remember things I've encountered at different times, and then like searching them and reminding myself. Basically, it's kind of like, it's almost like self-triggering, because I don't have the thing where many people have a thing where their biggest problem in terms of a certain range of things is being triggered or having too much poured at them. And for me, I'm like out there trying to activate my mind. It's like it is the ADHD thing, with dopamine and stuff, but it's also the intuition thing. So, I mean, I figured this out like a lot, but like earlier in my life, like I was just like stuck. Like, how do I even begin to figure out what to do? I need to know things. I need to have an understanding of myself and the world, like at least enough of it's like beyond like, okay, your job, here's your job or career opportunities. You could be a therapist or a doctor or a lawyer, or all these computer programmer, these types of things. Like, many people have that much of a map of life right in their minds. Like, okay, I could do this or I could do this, like a career trajectory decision. But I was like, these existing careers are not working. I mean, in my early 20s, because I had worked at a software startup, web startup, because I managed to figure out how to program and deal with computers and stuff when I was younger, and that was like my only accessible, valuable skill. And so I went into that, but then I realized there's so much more to me, and so my intuition kind of woke up again in my early 20s. So this goes back to this sort of center picture here of a young person as me at 14, and I was not learning in school. My mind was had like, I mean, it's going through changes, obviously, and so I was discovering new mental abilities, but I did not know how to use my mind or decide what to do, and then I would get in trouble for like not cleaning, and I really was confused. I did not, because it's from the Myers-Briggs or Jungian objective personality, etc. perspective. It's like extroverted sensing and introverted sensing, to sort of remember and plan out what I'm going to do with things and track time. Like, those were really foreign to me. So I was, or what I did was just what I knew, which was not much when it comes to like cleaning or something. So that's a whole thing. But the bigger life issue when I was 14 and 13 was school was a completely awful circumstance for me. It's like sitting there, like almost nothing clicked with my mind well, or if things did, then I would have needed to go through this process of making layouts or something, and instead it's like sit there and do worksheets. So, or whatever it was. So, I got into this thing when I was 14 with like, I want to do homeschooling, basically unschooling. I didn't have the word at the time, but sort of a custom without school education process, even if it was negotiated, what I would be doing, at least a negotiable educational circumstance where my mind was valued as needing specific approaches that maybe needed to be figured out, but it certainly was not school. So, like I told my mom, I'm learning maybe 5% of the time in school, and none of it seems relevant to life. And my mom's response in this interaction was, or in this series of reactions over a few weeks, things like, you have to be socialized, and I don't want to hear any more about this. And I kept kind of pushing, but which is uncharacteristic for me. But then my mom at one point was just like, I don't want to hear any more about this. And she was like really like this, she seemed very distressed. And so that kind of freaked me out, because I have empathy, and I don't want to mess with other people's worlds. But then that put me in a bind, a double, maybe more than double bind. It put me in a bind, and because I wanted to be taken seriously, so I needed to self-advocate. I mean, I did not have that word, but I needed to self-advocate. But then what I wanted to self-advocate about was apparently like a don't go there trigger, like my needing different than school. And so my parents did not, and stepdad and so on, did not understand how my mind is different, and needed at least, okay, maybe figure out what's different. But it's like, I went to counseling as a result of this, and it was just like, okay, talking through things. And the counselor, I remember at the time, was like, oh, I have another client who doesn't like school. And it's just like, oh yeah, some people don't like school. Validation, okay, but then what? So so it was very like, what the hell? I mean, it's like this experience of living in a culture, family and culture, that does not make sense. It's like, so,
Okay, more in